Do you know the Tyrannosaurus Rex? Dad?
Hey, Dad.
Dad.
I need $300 for my prom dress. Is that okay?
Dad.
Uh-huh.
Do you know
thanks.
the Triceratops is the toughest herbivore of the Cretaceous period?
Uh-huh.
Did you know that the Brachiosaurus could use... Did you know...
Okay, these kids are driving me crazy. When do I get to drive them crazy? Hey, Father's Day.
Brandon, did you know that from 1938 to 1968, the Federal National Mortgage Association was the sole institution that bought mortgages from depository institutions, principally savings and loan associations, which encouraged more mortgage lending and effectively insured the value of mortgages by the U.S. government?
No.
So, Father's Day. Wanna do anything?
I'm gonna be annoying the kids all day.
Oh. Need any help? Gonna take a lot to drag me away from you. There's nothing that 100 men or more ever do.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Oh, there you are. I never got to finish telling you my story from the office the other day. It was so cool. Gosh. Brandon? Are we there yet? I'm not going to bore you with all the details, just most of them. Okay, so anyway... And finally, Jimmy comes up behind me. He goes, "You got the hiccups, man." You know what I do to cure hiccups? What I do is I go, "Ah!" A staple gun! I need that staple gun! That's it! It comes with free staples! It comes with free staples! No, the file! Brandon, give me the file! I want the file! You never get me anything! A skill saw!
Potty break. I gotta go potty. Hey everybody, I know her. Everybody. My daughter.
Don't drive your kids crazy, but have the Father's Day of your dreams.
Brandon! Brandon, listen. I was having a bad dream. Can I jump in bed with you? Okay.
My kids have a full day ahead of them. So I'm implementing some of this stuff later. Hopefully your Father's Day doesn't look anything like that. Maybe it does, but that's okay too. Real quick, again, happy Father's Day to all the dads. If you don't mind, excuse me for a minute. Dad, thanks. I love you like crazy. Happy Father's Day. He's listening in Florida, so I love that I get to do this with him for a few minutes this morning. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about God's instruction, and we've been looking at God's instruction as it relates to us and our families. And the first place we started was with our foundation. So we're going to go back there because we keep coming back to this point. Talked about it this morning in our study in Galatians. We were coming back to, Brother Leland talked about, he said, hey, the stuff that Paul shared right away was foundational. It's always important that we don't forget our foundations. We experienced this, Carrie and I experienced this a few years ago. Our stone foundation on our house was actually eroding away from water and stuff like that. And it's kind of a scary thing when you start to see, the foundation being eroded away. The thought is, pretty soon, if it goes, so goes the house, and so goes everything else. And in a spiritual sense, that's really important, because if our foundation isn't strong and it's not sure and it's not based on Jesus Christ, then you can guarantee your foundation will eventually erode away. It'll go away. And Jesus would tell us a story, we'll talk about that in just a second, about when that foundation eroded away, what the collapse and the ruin of the house caused. And so this is our place that we kind of keep coming back to, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 11. And it says, "For no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ." And I keep telling you, that doesn't mean you can't try to lay a different foundation. It just means that it's not one that'll work. It won't hold up over time and over the trials and difficulties and challenges of life and marriage and family and everything else that happens. So what we've discovered over the last few weeks is that the most solid foundation that you can have for your life and the most solid foundation you can have for your family's life is Jesus Christ. What does that mean, right? We've used that over and over again. What does it mean to have a life built and founded on and established on Christ? What's cool is Jesus didn't leave us hanging on that. He would tell us what it means to know Him and have Him as a foundation and what the results of building your life on Him would be. That's the great thing. He doesn't say, hey, just build your life on me and then we'll just see how it goes. He actually says, if you build your life on me, here's what you can anticipate. And so let me show you what Jesus spoke in Luke, the 6th chapter, verse 47. He said this. He says, this is what an unshakable life founded on me looks like. He says, everyone who comes to me, right, step one, and hears my words and does them. And here's the thing that we have to understand. If we pull any of this out of the equation, it's no longer a strong foundation. It's no longer a sure foundation. We can't stop with just coming to know Christ as Savior and say, okay, well now my life from this point on will just be established and everything will go well. I'm going to tell you, even if you do all these three things, doesn't mean that your life is going to be without storms or difficulties. It just means your foundation is solid and it won't collapse and it won't ruin. But if all we do is come to Christ and think, well, if I'm saved, that's all I need to do, and you think that somehow just by doing that life isn't going to take its toll on your life and your family's life, you have another thing coming because you haven't done anything. And here's the way I kind of thought about it. Coming to me, let's put this in like our practical layman's terms. Coming to me would be like purchasing property. Right? It's kind of like it's taking that initial step. You made the purchase of the property. What do you have as a result of purchasing the property? Land. You have that. It's yours. It can't be taken away. Well, I guess we can get into discussion about eminent domain and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, we will talk about that. But it's yours. It won't go away. It's forever yours. But you haven't built anything on it worthwhile. You've got it, and that's great, and it's forever yours. And that's the same example of coming to Christ. Forever yours. That relationship is forever yours, but you haven't done anything with it yet. And then he says, the next one is, here's my word. So that's kind of like buying the land, and now you've cleared the land. You've cut down the trees, you've done some dirt work, but now what do you have? Now you have land that's cleared. You still don't have anything on it that's worth anything. Then he says the next step actually does them. Actually does what I commanded you. Actually does what I say. Now it's the opportunity to lay that foundation and begin building something worthwhile. Something that's going to be there as a legacy for your life and your family's life. And so here's what Jesus says. He says, this is what a life that's built on me looks like. He says, he comes to me, hears my words, does them, and then he goes on. He says, he is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And don't miss this part. Okay, don't miss this part, because Christians get kind of weird about this. We like to pull this part out. We like to pull, and when a flood arose and the stream broke against that house, we'd like to pull that part out. Jesus intentionally inserts it, puts it there. And when a flood arose and the stream broke against that house, could not shake it. Why? Because it had been well built. It had been well built. The result of having the right foundation and giving good effort and gaining godly direction. And what I love about this is as Jesus would tell this story and he would relate it to people and he'd do it in layman's terms so we can get a mental picture of what that looks like. He didn't say that this would be completely void of storms. He said it would be protected through those storms. That it could weather the storms. It didn't say you'd have no storms. And if we think that coming to Christians, we've kind of got the wrong idea of Christianity. That it's not about accepting Christ and having like a storm-free life. It's about understanding storms will come and who my foundation is and who's going to protect me and take me through those storms. The truth is, and I think most of us know this if you've been a Christian for any length of time and you've been married or trying to raise a family, building a strong, authentic, godly family is a slow, deliberate, painstaking process. It's no accident that Jesus compared this process to digging deep. See that? The guy who dug deep. What did he dig deep into? What was he digging deep into? Rock. How easy is that? I mean, I can remember when we were doing work here, and we were lucky that a lot of the upper soil was sandy, and we could move it around pretty good. But every once in a while, if you find some spots, and there's rock. I can remember a few years back, they were building some homes up in subdivision in Reedsburg, and they hit a lot of rock. Guess what they had to do? Blast it. I mean, it was work. They had to drill holes, and they had to blast it, and they had to try to do all this work to make sure that they could get a strong and a sure foundation set. And I think Jesus, he gives us this story, and it's not an accident that he tells us it's digging deep into rock. And you know what the reality is? Most people quit. They do. Like, I come to Jesus, I just want to get out of hell free. I don't want to go there, so I'm going to do the Jesus thing. But then that's kind of it. And then we wonder, well, why is my life such a mess? And why is my family's life such a mess? Maybe because we didn't continue to just dig deep. And it's hard work. And sometimes you need encouragement to kind of keep at it. Foundations are not laid overnight. Families are not instantly strong. There's work to be done. And there's a learning curve involved. And that's the cool thing is as we gather together this morning, I don't have everything figured out. So if you came this morning, you're hoping like, this guy has everything figured out. You got the wrong guy, got the wrong church. Because the reality is we have a church full of people who don't have everything figured out. So you guys laugh because it's true. It is. So welcome to Cornerstone this morning. A bunch of people who don't have it all figured out. You know what's cool? Is we know the guy that does. He does. He's got it figured out. And he tries to lovingly guide us, warn us, direct us, redirect us, all those things. I can remember just how idealistic Carrie and I were about raising children, and then we had children. It was like we had these incredible ideals. This is how life is going to be, and then we had kids. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Just a side note: have you ever noticed like a lot of the experts on child raising don't have children? Ever noticed that? That's like my first sign. Like if I look at a book, it talks about child raising, and they don't talk anything about like their own family and children. Like on the back cover, I put the book back down because they speak from theory, not from experience, and not so good there. My thought. One of the things I'll just share with you personally. One of the things I love to do is when I'm sitting with young couples and counseling with them as they're getting ready to be married and they're talking about family, I love to just sit with them and just talk to them. Well, what do you guys see for your family? And I love to hear them just go on for a while about, well, our family's going to be like this, and we're going to do like that, and then we're going to be this way, and every time our kids need to be disciplined, we're going to keep our cool, and we're going to be level-headed, and we're going to have the right perspective. And I just sit back and go, yeah, right. I'll talk to you in about 10 years when you're pulling your hair out and you don't know what to do next, and you're calling Steve Bauer because you need counseling. And hey, no shame there. I've called Steve Bauer myself a few times. So not that my family needed counseling. I probably needed it. Like, help me out. I came across a book sometime back entitled Promises to Peter, Building a Bridge from Parent to Child. It was written by a guy named Charlie Shedd, who was a Presbyterian minister. And I love, in this book, he relates how the title of his sermon on parenting began to change as he gained more experience as a father. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Before he was a father, he simply called his sermon, How to Raise Your Children. And people from like all over the place came to hear this guy's message. After one child, he waited a while before preaching this sermon again, which was now newly entitled, Some Suggestions to Parents. 2 children, and he was calling this, 2 more children, and he was calling the sermon, Feeble Hints to Fellow Strugglers. That was awesome. Several years, and another child later, he rarely preached this sermon. But when he did, this was the title. Anyone here got a few words of wisdom? I thought this was so appropriate. This morning, because it's Father's Day, we're going to focus our attention on dads for a few minutes. And just real quick, if I could, how many of our dads in here this morning? How many dads do we have? Awesome. Very cool. Dads, would you agree that the dad thing is kind of difficult? Anybody agree with that? And I'm not comparing. I know moms are like, oh, come on, please. But I'm not comparing. I'm just saying, it's kind of a hard gig. Let me share with you one of the ways, or at least one of the places I tend to struggle, and maybe you can relate to this. As a Christian, I often struggle with my own standards and my own ideals, let alone trying to meet God's. Anybody else struggle there? Like, I let myself down, like where I think I should be. And then I go, okay, and then you see God, and you go, okay, wow. Like, really, I'm really nowhere where I should be or need to be. But here's what I think, no matter what kind of a dad I am or what kind of a dad you are, here's something I think we can all agree on, and hopefully we all know. We're leaving a permanent impression on our children. And sometimes people say, well, I didn't have a dad. Your dad left a permanent impression on you because of that. We're leaving a permanent impression on our children. And maybe you've never really stopped and thought about this, but this morning, if nothing else, I want you to let this thought just kind of press deep into your heart for a moment. Your influence, no matter how great, how small, whatever it is, your influence will shape and will mold the kind of adults your children become. It will. No matter how great, or how small you think your influence is, it will shape and it will mold your children into the adults that they become. So here's the challenge this morning that we're faced with. How can we as dads shape and mold our children carefully and wisely and in accordance with God's design? Because that's the thing. I don't know if you listened to the video, the music that was playing kind of in between as people were coming in. Sanctus Real sings a song, Lead Me. And it's an awesome song. The words to it are incredible. But if you really, really listen, what the writer of that song and the singer of the song is saying, God, give me the strength to lead my family. But then he says, but you lead me as a dad. And so the challenge this morning is, are you leading your family? And if so, who are you following? Because you're following something. You're following someone. You're either following your own ideas or you're following someone else's, or hopefully you're following God's. So for a few minutes this morning, I want us to take some parenting tips from the Apostle Paul, because he writes the first of 2 letters to the Thessalonians, and it's a group of people that Paul kind of says that they're like children to him. So, and if you're here this morning and you're not a dad, that's okay, because this is good stuff for moms too. Or if you're not married, you don't have kids, hang on to this stuff, because this may be advice you want to use later. Or maybe you have friends that have kids and they're just trying to figure this parenting thing out, or your parents have grown children, they're trying to figure the parenting thing out. I'm going to share with you some things, hopefully that God has put in His Word that will make an impression, and it'll be valuable stuff for you. So if you have your Bibles or a Bible app, just make your way to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 this morning. As you're doing that, let me just give you a little bit of, like 2 cents of background on this letter, because sometimes that helps. The Thessalonian church, the first 2 European churches that Paul would establish were Philippi and Thessalonica. Those were the 2 first European churches. They were actually in northern Greece, what we would call Macedonia. That's the area where these churches were located. And what's really cool is if you look on a map, or if you have a Bible map, I don't know if the Bible map would show it maybe, but if you looked in like an ancient map, you'd find that the Romans had built a road. It was called Via Ignatius, and it was about a 700-mile road that the Romans built that was huge. It was almost the width of northern Greece. That's how wide this road was. And it kind of tied all these cities together on the upper part, the northern part of Greece. And so that's kind of the road that Paul would take. You go from Philippi over to Thessalonica. And when he traveled to this port, and it's a port city, so had a lot of commerce, a lot of people gathering in Thessalonica. What was interesting is he wanted to stay there, and he really wanted to keep ministering there. Problem was he was being pursued and persecuted the whole time. So he wasn't able to stick around nearly as long as he wanted to. But for the few weeks he was there for several weeks. And while he was there, he came to introduce people to Jesus Christ, and they came to know Him, and then they were baptized like the Bible had taught them to be, and as Paul was teaching them, they were baptized, and they were formed into this church, and he begins to just pour into them all of the things that he can to help them in their new faith. And the interesting is, we're really blessed now, because we go to homes or churches, and we could just pick up Bibles and we start reading. Those people didn't have that. So what they had was a lot of times they had Old Testament documents, that kind of stuff. But New Testament, they really didn't have anything. They may have had the book of Mark, possibly then. But other than that, they didn't have a whole lot to read from. So they had to take Paul's word for it as he was an apostle of Christ and would share what he had learned and what he had come to know. And so he was pouring all of himself into this handful of believers. He was just working night and day to help establish them in their new faith. And what's interesting, Paul would never return to this church, although he really wanted to. He would never get a chance to come back, but those people there, that church, had captured his heart. And so what's interesting is a few years later, he hears about this persecution that's just hitting this church, and he does a couple things. He sends them a couple of life preservers. The first one, if you read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, is he sends Timothy to him. He sends a guy named Timothy, who was a younger Paul was kind of Timothy's mentor. So he sends Timothy to Thessalonica to help them and get them kind of stable. And then secondly, the second thing he did to encourage them and help them is he wrote them a letter. And that's what we're going to be reading. So through his pen, Paul expresses this parent-like love to these people. And we can learn some really cool things as parents from what he writes. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 is where we'll be. Verse 7, it says this. He says, "But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children." And then look down at verse 11. He says, "You know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children." What's interesting is if you read through Scripture, you'll never find the phrases "as a mother" and "as a father" used by Paul again. This is the only place he does that. So what we have to understand is after he writes that, obviously these people have like a really special relationship with Paul, and he has a really close and special relationship with them. And so what I'd like for us to look at is verses 8 through 12, and we're probably only getting verse 8 this morning, because everybody's got I know we got Father's Day stuff going, so I don't want to keep you very long. But we're gonna look at some of this language that God inspires Paul to use, and he paints a picture. God paints a picture of what a dad with his kids looks like. And so this morning, we're going to begin finding 5 timeless tools for dad. All right? So here's the first tool, and this is significant. So if you're writing notes or whatever, actually let dads know. When you leave this morning, we've just got a little gift for you just to honor you and thank you. It's a little handy tool belt. And it's just a way of thanking you for being a hands-on dad. And in one of those pockets, you'll find a little card, and it lists all 5 tools. So if today's the only day you're going to be able to be with us, and you won't be able to get back or whatever, you've got that with you. It's got the verses. You can look them up. But we just want to do that, and we just want to encourage you and thank you for being hands-on dad. So here's the first tool. If you're going to jot it down, it'll be on your little card there. Demonstrate affection. Demonstrate affection. And this one, I know right away the guys are like, really, seriously? We're going to get lovey-dovey like the first one? Can't we ease into this? This can be a tough area for some dads, but I want you to look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Look at verse 8 for a minute. Watch what Paul writes. He says, so affectionately longing for you, and I'll continue to read, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God. He says, not only did we just give you the gospel, he says, but also our own lives. Why? Because you had become dear to us. He says this is more than just a job. It's a relationship. And Paul talks about it from kind of a pastor to a church kind of relationship, but this is so applicable to us as parents. It's more than a job. It's about a relationship that you have with these little kids or these big kids now or whatever it may be. And what are you giving them? Are you giving them just the basics that they need, or are you giving them your life? And Paul says that we were pleased to not only impart to you the gospel, but our own lives. We poured our lives into you because we love you that much, we care about you that much, we think you're that special and that valuable. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, if you were in the King James Version, it would read this way. It says, being affectionately desirous of you. Guys, use that phrase this week once, and I'll give you $1. I'm so affectionately desirous of you. I don't know where that may get you, but it may get you far. I don't know. But your kids may just love to hear that. The New American Standard Bible, it says it this way. I love this. It says, having so fond an affection for you. Having so fond an affection for you. You know what's interesting is when you start to read these verses, and if you continue reading down through verse 12, you find out that Paul wants these people to know how much they mean to him. He didn't want them to ever have a doubt how much they meant to him. It's interesting that word affection, it's kind of a lost term in our society. I don't hear that word used very much anymore. I don't hear the word affection used. So we'll do a little dictionary dig here. The word literally means to feel oneself drawn to something or someone. There was another dictionary I looked up. It described affection as having a strong feeling intensified by inner attachment. That's a cool one. There's a strong feeling intensified because of relationship, because of an inner attachment. And what's amazing is if you start to break apart this verse and the Greek and everything else, it paints the picture of a father who's affectionately drawn to his child. And the imagery, which is so cool about the old languages painted pictures with their words because it always described something. And this picture that it paints the picture of a dad who loves to feel the arms of his kids around his neck. Isn't that cool? That's the picture it paints. So affectionately longing for you. The idea is that a dad that loves to feel his kid's arms around his neck and can't wait to feel those arms around his neck again. You know what's amazing? Our Father in heaven feels the same way about us. He longs to feel our arms around his neck. Can't wait for that. Dads, let me ask you, how often do we express the kind of affection that Paul talks about to our kids? How often do we express that kind of affection? it's pretty easy when they're little, you know? You know, the babies. You hug them and they don't have a choice. They're going nowhere. You're like, "Rrr," and they're like, "Oh," and you're like, "No!" You know? Or when they're little, you know, when they're little or toddlers, you know, a lot of times you hug a little toddler, they're going to hug you back. But what about when they're those preteen years? Or those teenage years? Or maybe even as they get older? Here's what I've seen happen in many homes, and this happens a lot. Physical affection is replaced by physical aloofness. There's a distance all of a sudden. And it can be disastrous. The result of that can be disastrous. Let me share with you a couple things. An overwhelming majority of research indicates that if a child is to become a well-adjusted adult, capable of healthy relationships and wise life choices, proper physical affection from his or her dad is essential. Let me share with you another interesting statistic. One particular study revealed that most promiscuous women shared at least one common factor. They grew up in homes where their fathers were unaffectionate. Think it's important? Absolutely. That we demonstrate affection to our kids. And I know everybody's got their own thing on how that happens in your family. And that's fine. Just make sure it happens. I cannot express enough just the incredible importance of nonverbal communication. We talk about it so much here at Cornerstone. We talk about how important it is. The scriptures talk about how important it is that just what you say isn't enough. It's what you do that makes significant impact. And we talk about that all the time because you can say anything. I can say I love you. I can say I'm here for you. I can say I've got your back. I can say all this stuff. But until I step up and do it, it doesn't mean anything. And dads, it's the same thing with our kids. The I love you as you're bolting out the door, or the kid says I love you, you're like, yeah, okay, I love you too, and off you go. And there's no opportunities to really demonstrate affection to them. It doesn't matter what you say, it's what you do that makes significant impact. My dad, I've shared this before, but it just makes me love my dad more, I guess. He came from a home with a father that was horribly unaffectionate. Kids were a workforce in his home. And to the point where at 12 years old, he had a full-time job after school to buy his own clothes and his little brother's clothes. That's how he was raised. That was life. And that was normal for him. He didn't know any different. Then he accepted Jesus Christ as a Savior shortly after exiting the Marine Corps in Vietnam. Came to know Christ. And through God's grace in his heart, and through his understanding that he needed to be a different kind of dad, there wasn't a moment in my life growing up that I was lacking my dad's affection. And I know in some homes maybe it seems weird, but I can remember as a kid sitting at the dinner table, and Dad is like, still, you need to cut back on the coffee. He is a crazy coffee drinker, like drinking all day long, just all day. And I just remember sitting around the dinner table as a kid, and he'd get up to refill his coffee mug, and without a doubt, every single time he would do that, whoever one of us kids are sitting near him, he'd reach down and just kiss us on the head. And that seems weird, I know, but I love that. Because I knew how he was raised. I knew how he was brought up. And for him to do that, that's a work of God in the heart of a man. And sometimes we get weird about that. Because remember, we're men. Okay, Jesus was the ultimate man. And he never failed to demonstrate affection. So if you got this weird ego, man, masculinity trip, I'll help you. We'll resolve that for you, okay? We'll kind of get past that. Because it was obvious that Jesus loved, and he expressed it. And Paul writes this letter, and Paul was a man's man, and he writes this letter, and he talks about expressing affection. I love that my dad used to do that. Matter of fact, I'm not ashamed to admit, we still, when we see each other, we hug and kiss each other on the cheek. Got a chance to do it a few weeks ago when I got down to see him in the hospital. First thing he did was struggle to the side of the bed and give me a big hug and kiss on the cheek. I love that. Let me share with you, from my own perspective, as I was growing up, a couple things, and maybe this resonates, or maybe it challenges you, or maybe it just reinforces some things that are already happening in your house. But my dad's arm around my shoulder often meant more to me than anything he could ever say. It often did. Sometimes it meant it's okay to feel disappointed. I've had those times where Dad's arm around my shoulder meant it's okay to feel disappointed or discouraged. Sometimes that arm around my shoulder expressed pride and strength, courage. There were times with my dad when he put his arm around my shoulder, and I knew my dad wasn't a man of a lot of words. And I knew that when he did that just by doing that, without saying a word, he was letting me know that I would never have to doubt that he loved me and that he'd be by my side. Just by putting his arm around my shoulder. That was it. I want you, dads, this morning, for just a minute, think about your own children. And let me put this question out to you and just let it sink down and let it just kind of sit there and soak for a minute. If your kids had only physical, nonverbal communication to go by, what message do you think they've received from you? If the only thing you were able to express to your kids was nonverbal, physical in nature, what message have you sent them? One of my favorite scenes from the Bible is shared in a story by Jesus in Luke 15. And if you guys know Luke 15, you know your Bibles pretty well, you'll know that that's the story we typically call the prodigal son. I don't know why that ever got named that, because it's really not a story about the son. It's really a story more about the father. But anyways, you know the prodigal son, and we'll just condense it. He took the money and he took off. Okay? That's kind of the story. The son took the money and he took off. And he blew the money, and he blew it in ways that were horrible and disappointing. And what's interesting to me is what I love about the story is that after all of the hurt and the poor decisions and the wrong turns and all this stuff that happens to this kid, this youngest son kind of comes to his senses, and he begins to wind his way home. And this powerful scene kind of erupts in verse 20 of Luke 15 as Jesus tells the story. And it says, and he, this lost and wayward son, arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, because he was looking, and had compassion, and ran. And sometimes we don't pause on that running point, but in that day, in that culture, that was a big deal. Older men wore long robes, and it was a shame to reveal your legs. It was considered a shame for older men to reveal their legs at all. They would wear the long kind of cloaks and things. And when Jesus talked about this story and he talked about a father running, guess what the only way a father could run would be? He'd have to lift that thing up and just go. And so he gives us an idea that this father was not ashamed to run to his son. And then look at the last part. And he fell on his neck, kissed him. By the way, this father is a picture of God. And it's a picture of how he feels about every one of you this morning. He loves you that much. It says that Jesus wasn't ashamed to go to a cross. That was despising the shame, despising all of the criticism and horrible things that would be said about him and to him. Despising the shame, he went to a cross because he knew ultimately that cross would pave the way for a relationship with him and with the Father. This is how the Father feels about you. It's the way he desires to welcome you as you turn to him. We're going to wrap up, and I know we've only grabbed one of our tools this morning, but I'm convinced that this one's huge. I'm actually convinced to the point where we can do the other four, and if we don't do this one, it doesn't matter. Because you can talk godly, and you can preach at your kids, or you can do all this other stuff, but if you don't demonstrate affection toward them, what you say doesn't matter. See, we have a saying here that we continue to be reminded of over and over again at Cornerstone. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Kids are the same way. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's a challenge. Dads, there's going to be times when our kids will bring us tremendous joy, and you know that there's going to be times when they bring you tremendous heartache. And in the middle of all the joys and heartaches of life and growing up, are you communicating to your kids how much you love and appreciate them? One of my favorite verses in the Bible sheds some light on how God loves us and how he wants us to love others. It says this: but God demonstrates his own love. And that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You see, it wasn't enough for God to tell us he loves us, and he does countless times. He tells us over and over and over and over again how much he loves us. But you know what? That wasn't enough for us. We needed to see it, and he showed it. He demonstrated it. This morning, as we close, let me ask you 2 questions, and I just want you to consider these and answer them honestly, if you will, between you and God. First of all, have you accepted God's love? Because if you were here last week, hopefully you learned that without accepting God's love, you will never be able to demonstrate love. Not the way you're designed to, not the way that God has built you to. You're just not going to be able to love like that. And there's always going to be this shortfall. There's always going to be this point where you go, man, I want to be more loving, and I just can't. You're right, you can't, because you haven't accepted God's love, so he can't pour that in you so it can ooze out of you. You can't give from an empty well, You can't draw from an empty well. And in a sense, God says, I want you to come to me and accept my love and accept salvation through Christ so that I can pour myself into you, pour my love into you. And from that, it's not just a well with a bottom where it just stops. It just continues to flow out of your life and into the lives of others. It makes a difference in your life and in the relationships you have. This morning, I'd like to challenge, first of all, the first question was, have you accepted God's love? The second one is, do you demonstrate it? And here's a good thing, because a lot of times, I know how I would answer. Yes, on both occasions, and I'm doing fantastic. That's what we think. If you want an honest answer, talk to your wife or your kids about that. If you want a real honest answer. Some of you would like to live, oblivious to reality, and you want to believe that you're demonstrating love, just great, you're doing a grand job at it. Ask your wife. Or better yet, watch her. Or watch your kids. It's kind of sad when your kids don't want to be around you because maybe you're not demonstrating the love you could or should. Be careful about that. I want to challenge husbands and fathers this morning, including myself, to grab the tool. And the tool only does as good as the person grabbing it and getting to work with it. All right? It's like handing somebody a hammer and they just stand there with it in their hand. It does no good. So grab this tool and then get to work and ask God to help you demonstrate and help us demonstrate our love more consistently. Here's why. First of all, our wives and our children need to see it. Secondly, our world needs to see what godly men loving in a godly fashion looks like. Not to be ashamed. To love your kids and love your family. Love your wife. And actually love people around you. Don't be ashamed to do that. Don't feel like it's like well, that's not manly. For God so loved the world. Wow. Shows me that's pretty manly. It's pretty manly to love. This morning, have you accepted God's love? Secondly, do you demonstrate it? We're going to sing a song here this morning, and we're going to close. If you haven't accepted God's love and received Christ as your Savior, and you have a chance to do that this morning, you could do that right where you're seated. You can just pray and recognize that Jesus went to a cross to take care of sin. And the problem with sin is that it blocks you from getting to heaven. It blocks you from getting to God. And God gave us a way for that to be resolved. And He did that through Jesus Christ's death on the cross. So Jesus took punishment that you and I deserve to pay a price that we could never pay. So that we can have a relationship you can never afford anyway. He did it all. He paid it all for us. That's what a father's love looks like. That would extend and invite, guide, direct, love. Pray that you accept that this morning if you haven't. If you have, are you demonstrating it? No matter what you say, what you think, what you do is what really matters. We're going to stand. We're going to sing a verse this morning.
Stand together and turn to number 950.